Hey, it's Coach Anson here from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online U.S. History from 1877 to present. We're going to pick up with Unit 10, Lesson 5, the final solution, the Holocaust. Now, one of the most controversial, of course, events, of course, of WW2, of course, is the Holocaust in terms of looking at the 6 million Jews, or the estimated 6 million Jews, of course, that were killed by the Nazis, of course, in World War II. There's, been some debate in terms of how many, of course, or what the actual number was, or even by some even in terms of whether or not it actually even happened. So what we're going to do, of course, is go and give you the facts in terms of what we know. And what we're basically doing, of course, in looking at the Holocaust, we're going to tell you some of the history in terms of how we got to the point where 6 million Jews, an estimated 6 million Jews, of course, were killed in this particular conflict. What we're going to do, of course, is look at the unit focus question. As we said, we have 2 unit focus questions here. Why did efforts to prevent World War II fail? This is the focus question for part 1 of World War II. And then how did the home front effort bolster America's success in World War II? And that is the unit focus question for part 2 of World War II. What we're going to do, of course, is look at the vocabulary. And once we tell you, also, once again, as we always tell you, go ahead and of course, write down these vocabulary terms and define them yourselves. And as we see them, of course, when they come up in the lesson, we'll try to give you some explanation about what they mean or what it is that they are as we go. In addition to that, we have a lesson focus question that will guide our thought process in terms of what's important about this particular lesson. We have 2 questions that are going to guide our thought. It's going to be what actions did the Nazis take in dealing with the Jews prior to the beginning of World War II? And then what was the final solution to the Jewish problem created by the Nazis in Germany? What we're going to do, of course, is jump right in with the do now activity. And what it is a very simple thing today. What we want you to do is define the term scapegoat. If you have an idea what that term means, we want you to go ahead and write down at this time. And if you don't know what that term means, what we want you to do, of course, is go through and look it up. So go through, define the term scapegoat. We'll give you a couple of moments, of course, to do that. And then we'll come right back and we'll talk about what that term means. Okay? When you went through and you looked up that term scapegoat, of course, you could have found, went to Webster, of course, and got a very flowery definition in terms of what the term means. But basically what a scapegoat is, it is a person, in most cases, a person, of course, that is used as a reason for something happening, though he or she may not have been responsible for it. So in terms of looking at, that's the context in which we're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about it in context of the Jews being scapegoats for some of the problems, of course, that happened in Nazi Germany. And we're going to find because they were seen as scapegoats or made into scapegoats by people like Adolf Hitler and the people that surrounded him, we're going to find that a lot of people are not going to have a whole lot of sympathy for the Jews, of course, in Germany when they see the things that start to happen to them. It's going to be kind of wild to look at the way that some people, of course, kind of ignore some of the things that happen, and we look at, these people who come in a great deal of stress and stress during World War II. The rise of anti-Semitism in Germany. Anti-Semitism is a word you may have heard of before. What it basically is, anti means against, and Semites in this particular case are Jews, so it's against the Jews. When we look at the rise of anti-Semitism in Germany, we're going to find that there's going to be a whole country that's going to look at the Jews and blame the Jews, of course, for a lot of their economic problems, of course, that they're having there. And the one thing that Hitler's going to do is he's going to use that as kind of a rallying cry to get people, of course, to get behind his agenda. The Jews, according to Hitler, were an inferior race, and that the reason for the economic hardship in Germany, and became the target of German attempts to commit genocide against him. And genocide is, once again, a good term. And genocide means the killing of a race of people. The Nuremberg laws were passed to strip Jews of their rights, professions, businesses, and citizenships. And also, it was a social contract of sorts in that it told you, who you could marry. It told you in terms of if you did marry somebody, what your children, of course, would be identified as German or as Jew. So it did a whole lot of different things in terms of looking at how it guided the way people saw or viewed the Jews before the war even begins. Kristallnacht was the night of broken glass. It was November 9, 1938, and it was Hitler's response to the Jewish murder in Paris. There was supposedly, a German that was killed in Paris by a Jew, and Hitler kind of glommed onto that idea and started basically taking that, using this propaganda, of course, to kind of rile up the German population about, how the Jews, of course, are using, using Germany's resources and becoming wealthy while the other Germans, of course, are suffering. So he directed his minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, to plan attacks on Jewish businesses, synagogues, and homes, and that's what Kristallnacht becomes. Kristallnacht means the night of broken glass, and what we want you to do is look at what happens during the night of broken glass. What we're finding, you see German citizens, of course, that are walking by, and they're seeing some of the damage, of course, that happened to Jewish businesses. And for the most part, nobody really even thought about it. It's just one of those situations where it happened, and no German citizens, of course, spoke up against it, and because no one spoke up against it, events like this, of course, became kind of commonplace when it comes to the Jews and how they're treated, of course, in Germany. What we have here is a chart from the Nuremberg racial chart. And basically, it set the guidelines for marriage and Jewish lineage in Nazi Germany. To make it easy for you, if you look on the far side of there, it says of German blood, which means that if you was of German blood, of course, you can marry any other Germans. After you leave and you start crossbreeding from crossbreed second degree to crossbreed first degree, what you'll start noticing, of course, is that the darker it gets in terms of those circles going from left to right, the more restrictions, of course, there was placed in terms of who you can marry. So if you looked at it, to give you a good example, if you had a Jewish, one grandparent was Jewish and the other grandparent wasn't Jewish, their child, of course, would be half Jew. But if you had, two the grandparents over here that were both German, and that means that your parent, of course, would be German. So you have one parent, of course, that is German, full-blooded German, one that is half Jew and half German, which means now you have their children, of course, be 1/4 German, which means that they can marry other Germans. But now you'll notice over here, if you have two grandparents and Jewish, they can't. At some point, the only way, that happens because the blood, of course, is being, for lack of a better word, it's being diluted here. It starts to restrict in terms of who you can marry, and then whether or not you would be, of course, identified as Jew. You could have 1/4 blood Jewish and still be determined a Jew and marry whoever you wanted. But after becoming a half blood German Jew, it started to get a little bit crazy, and you have to start asking for permission. Jewish attempts to flee Europe. Now, one of the questions that a lot of people ask is, well, why didn't the Jews leave? Well, a lot of them did attempt to leave. They tried to leave Germany, of course, and go to different places. They even tried to come to the United States of America. But nations like the United States of America, in some cases, had quotas, and we wouldn't allow the German Jews, of course, to come in. So even in going to Great Britain and different places, there were some, of course, countries that were allowed, able to allow them to come in. But it was very difficult for them to find landing spots. Many Jews started to leave Germany and Europe in the mid-1930s because they recognized the danger that they were in. After Kristallnacht in November 9th, 1930, more attempted to leave, and those who had means and somewhere to go did leave, but many were not as lucky because they couldn't afford to leave or they couldn't find places to accept them. Immigration quotas in places like the United States prevented them from coming to the United States. So they recognized that they were in a tough position, and they understood that Hitler, of course, was not a good dude, and some things, of course, could happen, and they did happen. Here's one of the German Jews, of course, that left. One of the most brilliant minds, of course, in the history of the world. Albert Einstein fled Germany after Nazis' rise to power, along with about 250,000 other Jews. He was fortunate that he was able, of course, to get to the United States of America. Now, we hear about, when we talk about World War II, we hear about something called the final solution. In other words, the question that Hitler had and the people around him had is, what do we do with all these Jews now? At the Wannsee Conference in January 20, 1942, German leaders met to decide what to do with the Jews. And they came up with this idea of the final solution. And what the final solution, identified was two things. Number one, we can place them in concentration camps. All the ones that are healthy and are able to work to support the German war effort, to make weapons and supplies, they could go to concentration camps. But if they were children, in some cases, or if they were feeble, if they were old or sickly, Then they, of course, would go to extermination camp, and then when they were at these extermination camps, they would be executed by being placed in gas chambers, and then their remains burned in the crematoriums. Well, here is one of the most notorious, German concentration camps in World War II. It's called Auschwitz. And if you notice up here, if you see movies like Schindler's List, you'll see that one of the things that most of the gates or some of the gates would have on it was Arbeit macht frei. And what Arbeit macht frei means is work makes free. So as a Jew, when you went there, you saw this particular sign and you said, okay, if I work hard, then I, of course, will be allowed to be free at some point. And that, of course, was not the case. Here are some of the remnants of Germany in terms of looking at what happened with the extermination camps. Here you have a crematorium, which is basically a big fireplace in Auschwitz. And over here, you have the monuments to the dead at Treblinka, which was also a concentration camp. And when you look at that, this was erected after the war as a monument to where Treblinka used to stand. And what they basically did is they put monuments to the Jews, of course, that died in that extermination camp. All right, the next thing we want you to do, of course, is complete the worksheet that we have on the Holocaust. And what we want you to do, of course, is fill the table below in with key events and their significance during the Holocaust. And just like we always do, I'll go ahead and do one for you. Let's take Kristallnacht, since we've talked about that to some degree. When did it happen? November 9th, 1938. So that's the date. The significance of it, it showed the willingness of German citizens to ignore the brutality that the German Nazis or the Nazi leadership had bestowed or had inflicted, of course, upon the Jewish population. And what it did is it set the stage, of course, for even more atrocities that would happen to those Jewish citizens later. All right, our lesson focus questions. What actions did the Nazis take in dealing with the Jews prior to the beginning of World War II? And then number 2, what was the final solution to the Jewish problem created by the Nazis in Germany? And once again, if you take a few minutes and look over those, it shouldn't be very difficult, of course, to come up with those particular answers. But if you did have some difficulty, this is what you should have come up with. First and foremost, what actions did the Nazis take in dealing with the Jews prior to the beginning of World War II? They took steps to identify who they were. They stripped them of their rights, crippled their businesses, took jobs away, enacted plans to turn them into scapegoats for Germany's economic issues. What was the final solution to the Jewish problem created by the Nazis in Germany? To place Jews into concentration camps, to work to support the German war effort, and to put them in extermination camps when they couldn't work anymore. Once again, this is Coach Anderson from Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online. This is one of the darker periods in the history of the United States of America and also in the rest of the world, but also one of the most controversial. And once again, don't take my word for it. Do your own research and draw your own conclusions. And we'll see you next time on Mississippi Public Broadcasting Online, U.S. History from 1877 to present. We'll see you next time.